This is CounterPoint, and I'm your host, Tanya Granic Allen. Today, we are diving into one of the most consequential political battles unfolding in Canada right now, the 2026 BC Conservative leadership race. In just a few short years, the BC Conservatives have gone from political outsiders to the official opposition and came remarkably close to forming government in this last provincial election. Now, with public frustration growing over affordability, crime addiction, government overreach, and the state of the economy, this leadership race could determine not only the future of the conservative movement in British Columbia, but also the future direction of the province itself. The stakes in this race could not be higher. The next leader won't just inherit a rapidly growing political movement, they could very well become the next premier of British Columbia. So joining me tonight are two voices with very interesting perspectives on where the conservative movement goes from here, political strategists and commentators Brock Stephenson and Jonathan Ross. We'll discuss the candidates, the ideological divisions in the party, whether the Conservatives should focus more on economic issues or cultural issues, and what kind of leadership is needed to defeat David Eby and the NDP. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to diving right in. So why don't you start, Brock, with just a brief overview of this contest. When is it taking place? How does the process work? And the current membership?
So voting is taking place this month in May. They're going to announce the winner at the end of the month. The winner succeeds Jen Rustad, who came very close to becoming premier, but had his best day as leader the day he lost the election and then had a year of chaos before he finally stepped aside. We're down to the final 5 candidates, and I think that out of that, we're going to see a strong leader emerge whose first priority is going to be getting the other leadership candidates' camps in line and on board so that they can unite and take on the NDP as we head into a possible soon election. Depends how long David Eby lasts in the premier's chair.
Okay, and Jonathan, is the process to be eligible to vote? I know that in typical leaderships, one has to obtain a party membership at a certain deadline point, and then they are allowed to vote. Is it a one person, one member, one vote, or is there like caucusing? Like, how does it work?
So it's been interesting because the party has put in a lot of protocols to make sure that nothing untoward happens in this race. So it's members could have signed up until April 18th. Now and then there's a second process. They have to register. They have to register with a voter ID, which has been quite controversial for many of the members who don't feel that they want to put an ID into the party. So, we have 42,000 members total after this big sign up. But it looks like only maybe about 10,000 across the province have been registered, and there's some of the ridings are very anemic. And then the way it works is if you're registered by the 20th, then between the 23rd and the 29th, you can vote. Each riding is weighted with 100 points, and so whatever percentage of the vote you get in the riding, you'll be attributed those points. If the registrants are less than 100, then you'll get the points associated with that lower number. But it's been quite complex, and they've done a lot to make sure that it goes smoothly and there's no advantage for anyone in terms of hijinks, so to speak.
So that's interesting. You flagged the uploading of the voter ID as an issue. On one hand, of course, you want to authenticate the voter and make sure people aren't being untowards or undermining the democratic process. On the other, there is legit concern. I mean, we've seen data breaches even recently in universities in Canada, federal government data breaches. We know these happen. So, do we really trust a party with our data? It's a very good point.
Well,
But more importantly, and potentially catastrophically, it is another hurdle. And at some point, you're like, how many hurdles does one need to put up in order for a party member to just go and pick? Can we go back to the paper and pen method? I think it's just so much better.
Well, fair enough. If we could have everyone show up, paper and pen would be ideal. But the problem is that people aren't going to come out. And so if you sign up 42,000 members, you want to get as much of them out as possible. We have examples of past leadership race parties in BC shall remain anonymous, where, you had people giving their PIN codes over to vote. And then there would be this mass room of PIN codes being issued for one candidate. And so the party was very reticent about going down that path this time. And that's why they put all these kind of protocols in place. And I know that it's, rankled a lot of members or certain members in terms of ID identification, but it's all just to make sure that nothing untoward happens in this race and that everyone has a fair shot.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, if someone is really determined to vote, they will make sure they exercise that right. Okay, we're going to be right back after this commercial break. Welcome back to CounterPoint. We are unpacking the 2026 British Columbia Conservative Leadership Contest. Voting will be underway very soon. All the memberships have been tabulated. The list of eligible candidates or candidates for whom to vote is down to 5. So it started a far more fulsome list. Now there are 5 in the race. The debates are all done. Why don't you start us off, Brock, with a brief overview of each of the candidates and what they're kind of known for?
So there's 5 candidates left. You have Caroline Elliott, who's a commentator, is very focused on the DRIPA issue and property rights. You have Carrie Lynn Finley, former federal MP and cabinet minister from the Harper era, longtime MP. Ian Black, a former BC Liberal MLA minister and Chamber of Commerce executive. You've got Pierre Millibar, the only current MLA in the race. And you have Yuri Fulmer, a candidate who ran in the last election, and businessman. So those are the 5. The first 4 seem to be the main legitimate contenders. Fulmer seems to be a bit of a protest vote. I suspect it'll go 3 ballots or so when we finally see the leader emerge.
And Brock, it is, again, in typical leadership fashion, at least nowadays, contemporary, it's a ranked ballot. So you put who your first choice would be. If that person doesn't get if there's no clear winner, then your second place votes get redistributed to whomever it is. Like, it's a ranked ballot.
Yeah, that's the system. It's ranked ballot. You have to be high enough up on the first ballot to stay on, and then close enough to either maintain or take the lead until someone has the majority of the ballots that are valid.
Yeah, that's one thing I love about the ranked ballot system, because even though you might have, say, the highest percentage in the poll numbers going in to the voting day or the day of tabulation, the way things shift based on second and third choices, it could really just changes. Things change so dramatically and sometimes very unexpectedly. So, Jonathan, let's talk about each of these candidates. Who is the perceived front runner, or at least polling wise, and what are their main issues?
Well, look, every campaign has released polls over the last few months that it's been favorable to them. So, I wouldn't take any candidate polls or any polls over the last few months released by one of the campaigns to heart. I wouldn't take them with a grain of salt, actually. But, I left the caucus communications about 3 months ago, and I've just stayed out of the race. And so I've just tried to, keep a neutral mind. And from what I can tell, this is a race down to 2 individuals, primarily, possibly 3. I think that Carrie Lynn Finley and Ian Black are definitely the front runners right now, as far as I can tell. And I think that Caroline Elliott is in the mix as well, although she's had some bumps along the way in her campaign. So I'd say those 3 primarily. I think that Peter, even though he's the only sitting member of in the legislature, I think that he's had a rough campaign. It's gone really slowly for him and not really dynamic. And Yuri's kind of done a really controversial move with regards to, he signed a deal with One BC, which is obviously a break-off party by former caucus members of the Conservatives that were elected and then months later left to form a new party. And he's signed a deal where basically he says if he becomes premier, if he becomes leader, he will sign a deal where they get 5 seats across the province. No details on how those seats are selected, and the rest will be taken by BC Conservatives. So it's put off a lot of people. I mean, those who like it, but it's really put off a lot of people in saying, he's saying Conservatives can't win without that deal, and I don't think many people agree with him, to be honest with you.
Well, and especially when the last election was determined by 1 seat, one is wondering, well, where's the sense in that? But things shake out differently in leadership. It's not your typical race, and I really appreciate it. Okay, so let's dive into some of the issues that are percolating. You mentioned, Brock, that, for example, on the Elliott campaign, she seemed to really champion the DRIPA issue and property rights. That is obviously a very hot button issue in British Columbia right now with certain court case decisions. How has that shaped out how has that shaped this race?
You've got a couple of major court decisions. The Cowichan claiming part of Richmond. There's another one that's claiming a different part of the Lower Mainland. There's a third one that's sort of working its way through the system. And the real estate market, particularly in the Vancouver area, has softened significantly in the last 3-4 months. You're seeing people reluctant to list their real estate. You're seeing people very reluctant to make a purchase. People are concerned. The federal government has had a bit of involvement. No one is taking the leadership and saying your investment is going to be protected. We're going to stand up for it. And I think that's one of the issues that's causing the most feedback in the race, and why Elliott and those other candidates that are bringing it up are getting such traction.
Okay, we're going to pick this up in just a moment. Welcome back to CounterPoint. We're unpacking the BC Conservative Leadership Contest, and joining me for that discussion are Brock Stephenson and Jonathan Ross. Jonathan, in the previous segment, we're discussing DRIPA and how several candidates have called for the repealing of it, and really kind of pushing back against what they see as bureaucratic, even barriers to development. Has the current Eby government just gone too far, perhaps prioritizing ideology over economic growth?
Well, yeah, and he's boxed himself into a corner like I've never seen before in politics. Excuse me. He has changed his position on DRIPA at least 3 times before. He's being boxed by the Indigenous leadership and the chiefs and some astroturf groups that are basically lobby groups but claiming to be First Nations nations. And then you have property owners and across British Columbia that are concerned. People right now in the Cowichan decision, 723 hectares. And what is happening is a lot of homeowners, whether it's coming up for mortgage renewal or mortgage renegotiation, they're being refused by their lenders because of this decision. There's too much uncertainty. So there's quite a few hundred homeowners in that area of the impacted area that are in limbo. And so people are really scared. And, then with land claims that basically traverse the entire province, you have the problem of everyone being nervous about their sanctity of their home and their private property rights. So yeah, I think he's boxed himself in. He's as I said, in the last 4 to 6 weeks, changed his position 3 times. And I think the chickens are coming home to roost in the sense that people are seeing that he doesn't know what he's doing. And and I'll mention this: when he was Attorney General back in 2019, he was the one who ushered in DRIPA. He was the main champion of it. He's the main architect of it. So now this is come full circle with him and now as premier.
Okay, and speaking on some more criticisms of the current government that we have heard during this leadership contest, Brock, several candidates have criticized some of the DEI policies, land acknowledgements and identity politics that have come up in the province. Do you feel that this is like a microcosm, that this is indicative of a growing sentiment from British Columbians, like a public backlash against some of this wokeness, if you will?
There is a degree of backlash to the wokeness. The economy is so weak and unstable that when the government is doing all these performative actions, you're really struggling to see people be in line with it when they're having trouble paying their bills, keeping up on rent, buying groceries. You're struggling because the provincial government has spent so much time on this that they've more or less ignored the economy. We've got healthcare issues, brand new hospitals that are having flooding issues, new hospital expansions that are canceled, school districts across the province that are having budget shortfalls, all because the economy isn't growing. It's tough to start a resource project, probably tougher in BC than any other province by a wide margin. And the NDP is going around making DEI hires at universities, spending a lot of time on land acknowledgements, and instead of growing the economy and saying BC is a great place to invest, they're focused on issues that don't help British Columbians become more prosperous.
Now, Jonathan, go ahead.
I just wanted to say one thing is that, it used to be this fringe issue maybe about land acknowledgements and SOGI. And I think that, the winds have changed. For example, sexual orientation education in schools, which is SOGI, the government's program. What it's done is it's taken away parental intervention into rights. The decisions are being made on pronouns or or things to do with identity outside of parents' purview, oftentimes by school districts, by administrators, by teachers. And so the problem is that this is no longer, people that are maybe very religious or believe in this strongly. This has become, I talk to people of all. I'm a young parent. Well, I'm an old parent with young kids, and I talk to parents of all persuasions and all faiths, and I hear the same thing. It's like, you cannot make decisions for me about my children in isolation, and that's what's happened. So, and largely due to the success of the Conservative Party, a lot of these issues have now become more mainstream, and I wouldn't say they're fringe anymore.
No, and so do you agree, Brock, that because I have heard that parental rights and the opposition to the sexual orientation, gender identity curriculum, SOGI, has become a major theme in this race. Do you expect whoever wins to carry this forward and use this as a major plank in the coming election?
I don't know if it's a major plank. It's a huge fundraising issue. The parents that were originally concerned are very concerned. More parents are getting more concerned as the education system continues to falter. When you're focused on issues like SOGI instead of trying to teach kids how to be engaged in the 21st century modern world, I think that's a huge challenge. And I think the school districts need to focus on educating children.
Okay, we're going to be right back. Welcome back to CounterPoint. We're discussing the BC Conservative Leadership Contest, and joining me is Brock Stephenson and Jonathan Ross. We've seen next door to you in Alberta, there is a growing backlash against the federal government over handcuffing of resource development. We've heard this be an issue in the BC Leadership Contest for the Conservatives. This seems to have a near total consensus amongst candidates. How central do you feel, Jonathan, resource policy should be for the Conservatives and for anybody who ever forms government?
Well, I think it's critical to, the path to recovery for the BC economy. And so in that context, it has to be critical. Like Brock said earlier, in British Columbia, there is so much challenges associated with resource projects. The DRIPA decision from this past couple of years has said that, you got to go back to the legislation now and revise it, because consultation has to be a part of it. So projects, these are billion-dollar projects, whether they're mines or they're pipelines or what have you. And now this course decision has basically said without consultation, nothing moves forward. And the business community has taken, great consternation with it. So I think that at the end of the day, the economy is in the tank. People are really struggling. We have had like 70,000 people leave BC over the past year. There's a mass exodus happening. People that just say, I'm not going to struggle in this province when I can move elsewhere and do better. And so I think that when it comes to the economy, the resource, revitalization of the resource economy has to be a central plank of any platform that the Conservative Party puts forward.
Okay, Brock, again, that issue, I think there seems to be consensus amongst all the candidates. Are there any other issues that separate the candidates that in this leadership?
I think the issues that really separate the candidates is how they deal with the breakaway One BC party. You've got Yuri Fulmer saying that he's going to strike a deal and have a slate, allow One BC to run 5 candidates. On the other side, you have everybody else saying we're running a full slate. We're trying to be a one-party government. There's not too much division. There's a lot of, am I a real conservative? Am I not a real conservative? And the voters, I think, are looking for an alternative to the NDP, and they want to see whoever takes charge at the end of May has this team united and is ready to govern, because BC is slowly becoming ungovernable between DRIPA and the NDP's focus on niche issues rather than on looking out for the interests of all British Columbians.
So, Brock, to follow up, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say that, I was working with caucus last year for the entirety of the year. We had an amazing session, legislative session, first session. But the fact of the matter is that we did ourselves in, but a lot of infighting. The John getting pushed out as leader. It was a year-long kind of ordeal, right? And every time we thought that we had kind of stability, we'd go back to it. And so I have a real problem with these purity contests. At the end of the day, it's not about sitting in opposition. and sitting on the issues. It's about making a party that's welcome, not in terms of compromising your values, but making it viable as a government in waiting. And that's what we have to all keep in mind. And so, there's a lot. The differences, like Brock mentioned, has been a lot of this purity test on what you did in the past and who you were associated with the past and whether you're the real conservative or the true
Right.
conservative in the race. And I think it's just, it shoots ourselves in the foot.
Well, the good news for the Conservatives is recent polling suggests that the BC Conservatives are actually now leading the NDP, and that's as a leaderless party, leading the NDP by 10 points, even again without a leader. What explains this momentum, Brock, and how sustainable do you think this is once this contest is over and defeating the EB government?
It's sustainable if they can keep their house in order. They haven't shown it yet, and the leadership race isn't a time to show it. But once someone's in, they're going to have to go to their fellow leadership candidates, both the final four that aren't elected leader and the ones that were in the race earlier, and show them that they can be respectful of each other's opinions, be part of a team, and focus on putting the interests of British Columbians ahead of any personal goals. I think everyone would be happier to be a cabinet minister than to continue to be in opposition. And if they can come around to that point of view and bring their teams with them, I think British Columbia may be on a different track after the next election.
Okay, so we're going to watch with bated breath to see the results of this leadership contest at the end of May. And then I'd like you both to come back on as we unpack what the future will hold. So thank you both so much for being here. Appreciate your time. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to suggest a topic for the show, feel free to reach out via X at Granic Allen or via the Newsform website. This has been CounterPoint. Thanks for watching.